Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, over at FalconsFans.com. I'm joined by my co-host, Scott Karasik, who is a managing editor at Blogging Dirty. We are back this week on Thanksgiving, or day before Thanksgiving. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Falcons' upcoming game against the Arizona Cardinals, of course, in Week 12. We will talk about some of the roster moves that they've made in the last few days. We'll talk about Ryan Schrader's contract extension, and we will answer you guys' mailbag questions. So, Scott, let's do what we always do. If there's a roster move that's worthy of talking about, we talk about it at the top of the show. I think there is one of these moves is significant just because it has to deal with potential injury. The Falcons officially placed Jacob Tammy on IR with his shoulder injury. We sort of knew he was out for the season after last week, but to fill his spot, they signed punter Matt Weil. That's a concern, obviously, because Matt Bosher exited the Eagles game with a hamstring injury, and so it does leave his status up in the air. The other roster move that they made, they brought cornerback Deji Olatoye off the practice squad to replace Stephen Ridley, the running back. So we got a little bit more cornerback depth. So I'll cede the floor to you, Scott, and where you want to go on those two moves.
All right. The Matt Weil move, love it, because I think if there's anybody who could learn after a year under Matt Bryant on like how to be the guy at place kicker, it's probably Matt Weil. That being said, the fact that he's signed and Bosher isn't good right now, I would basically say Bosher's probably out this week. Not that that's a huge deal in general, because I don't think there's much drop-off to Weil. I think Weil is a very underrated kind of guy, and I was shocked that he didn't have a job. So the fact that the Falcons likely won't have Bosher, it can be cause for concern. I'd be more concerned about the holding come game time more than anything else. Who's going to hold the kicks for Matt Bryant? Because that, to me, has more of an effect than who's just kicking the ball as hard as he can. Because that's all a punter does. He just kicks the bloody piss out of the ball.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I mean, it's a punter. Hopefully we don't have to use them except for kickoffs. And that's my view.
Yeah, I think that's the optimistic view. And not to sound disparaging when I say that. It is a concern because I think Bosher does help us out quite a bit. Obviously, because of our offensive success this year, he hasn't really had to sort of pull as much weight as he's done in past years in terms of managing field position, doing kickoffs. I am a little concerned. Our coverage units haven't been great this year. Those short kicks against the Eagles sort of really hurt us on field position. I'm a little concerned if Weil isn't as up to par on terms of, kicking those balls out of the end zone, out of the back of the end zone, and creating touchbacks. We might see our return coverage units get, I'm a little concerned about that. But, I think the holding issue, they'll probably either have Matt Ryan or Matt Schaub do that. Schaub was the holder for the Falcons when he was originally here. I think he did a little bit in the preseason. I think Matt Ryan did it as well at some point.
And Schaub was the one who did it when Bosher did go down. So
okay, I couldn't remember. I remember Bosher got nicked up this summer, and I couldn't remember whether it was Ryan or Schaub that came in and did it. So one of those two guys probably will do it this week. I would assume they're not going to make Weil do it.
I'm going to assume it's probably Schaub, if it's anybody. Yeah. And Schaub's done it for years. So
yeah, he's got a lot.
And then it's a comfortability kind of deal.
Yeah, so this. I don't think this. This move or whether Bosher's out or not is going to change the complexion of this game. But I do think it is an issue. I think this is going to be a pretty close game this weekend. So, these minor things sort of can make a small difference. I think the Falcons certainly are capable of overcoming this. But hopefully Bosher is ready to go. But because they signed Weil, it's probably I'm not too optimistic about it. On the Stephen Redley cut and the Deji Olatoye cut, or practice squad signing, I'm curious, Scott. I saw you tweet earlier today when you saw that Ridley got cut. You were curious who the Falcons signed to replace him. Are you good with this move to bring Olatoye off the practice squad?
I mean, honestly, I think it's kind of not a wasted move, but I think we're worrying about who the 53rd man on the roster on Sunday is with this move. I think people are going to overanalyze the shit out of it and go, well, he's brought in for cornerback depth and he's going to be active, and no, he's not. I mean, I could see the Falcons keeping 5 cornerbacks active through the rest of the season, but it'll be Alford, Collins, Goodwin, Trufant, and Poole.
Okay. I think this is going to be an interesting move because Olatoye was a guy that really sort of played well down the stretch for the Cowboys last season. A lot of Cowboys fans, a lot of Cowboys writers were really high on him. It seemed like a lock to make the roster this year. Then had a really bad last preseason game, and then he was a surprise cut. And I know there were a lot of smart Cowboy fans. Our friend Jonah Tolles was lamenting his absence from the Cowboys roster. He's one of those guys that I think has a little bit of upside and a little bit of potential to be, sort of a sleeper in next year's cornerback mix. If I'm putting the positive spin on this roster move, and this is pure speculation on my part, this is one of those things where maybe him sitting on the practice squad for all this long and now getting elevated off the practice squad isn't a sign that the Falcons have some issues at cornerback, which I don't think they do. It is more of, he's played well enough in practice that now we feel like he deserves an opportunity on the roster. Is he going to play this year? Probably not. But maybe, this may be a positive sign that when we get into the offseason, he might be one of those sort of Brent Grimes-esque, circa 2008 sleepers that you're like, this guy's in the mix for being a starter next year. I think that's the best case scenario, given that I don't think Robert Alford's going to be back next year. And I feel like the Falcons are going to have a pretty open competition at their right cornerback spot. And maybe Olatoye, along with Jalen Collins and maybe a free agent signing, will be in the mix to sort of see who lands on their feet there.
Hold on. I just got a text that I hadn't even looked at. It looks like he was brought in because the Cowboys were trying to sign him for the 53-man.
Oh, okay.
So the Falcons were like, nope, we like him. But buzz off, guys. Because the Cowboys are dealing with some injuries with both Claiborne and Carr. That, not big things, but minor things that where you're like, well, if one of them's missing, we need a guy who knows the scheme. So that explains a lot to me.
Yeah, definitely.
So
let's talk about Ryan Schrader's contract extension. That's probably the bigger move in terms of certainly long-term factors with the Falcons. For anybody that doesn't know, Ryan Schrader signed a 5-year extension worth up to $33 million, base value of $32, according to Ian Rappaport. Included $12.5 million in guarantees and a 3-year payout of about $19.5. I think Vaughn had like 19.1 or something. But I know, Scott, you did a pretty, I don't know if you found information or you were sort of guessing at the structure of the contract.
No, that's information that I found. I combined with I basically took all the information that Vaughn McClure put up based off the CBA. The contract hasn't hit the NFLPA database yet, so I don't know 100% exactly how it's structured. But it looks like it's a very team-friendly deal, first of all. The Falcons do take a good bit of cap hit next year in 2017, $7.1 million. But after that, they don't take a cap hit over 6.35. And in 2018, they only take 5.1. Also, it's really only structured as a $12 million or $12.2 million deal over the first 2 years. After that, it's a year-by-year prove-it deal, the way it's structured. So, because there's only $300,000 worth of signing bonus proration after that second year. So he's going to have to keep earning it every single year, which for a guy like Ryan Schrader, you'll want him to, because he's the kind of guy who's going to ball out when he's got that pressure on him. He's going to do better as he gets more pressure on him. And if you looked at the comps, my favorite comp for him was going to be Mitchell Schwartz, because I feel like they're about the same talent level. Schwartz's contract is way, way, way worse for his team after the first 2 years. And it's tougher to get out of for them. Because Schwartz did sign 5 years, $33 million. But that first year, it's very back-heavy. And those first 2 years, he's only making $9.3 million. So it's going to be, as he gets to the last part of the deal, that's when he's making his money. And then he's got Schwartz has a bunch of escalators that could make his last 3 years as high as $10 million. So the Falcons wound up getting a much better long-term deal, and they don't have to eat the cap hits as bad as anyone, really. So for a guy who, again, this goes down to homegrown players, when you got a homegrown player like Ryan Schrader, and you can keep him, and you don't have to pay him that much, and you've got Schrader, Matthews, Levitre, and Mack all locked up through at least 2018, if not 2019, because you got to include the fifth-year option for 2018 for Matthews. You've got a decent set of linemen, at least for the next 2.5 years from now, that are all locked up.
Yeah. I think this move is a good move for the Falcons. It shows that they've learned a little bit from that Sam Baker deal. I think the key with the Schrader deal was always going to be a sort of deal that you could get out of after 2 years, which it sounds like is going to be the case. At that point, Schrader's going to be 31. I know, people say, well, because he hasn't played that much football, he won't wear down as quickly.
After
I just know
he's only going he'll be 31 after 2018. You're right.
Yeah. And, that may be true, but I don't think you should sort of bet on that. There aren't that many sort of 32, 33-year-old offensive tackles starting that aren't like future Hall of Famers in this league. You got to be like Andrew Whitworth or Jason Peters level for the most part to be able to maintain for that long. And while Ryan Schrader is a very good offensive tackle, I don't quite put him on that level. So I do feel like the Falcons put themselves in a favorable position. They should be able to get 2 years out of Schrader, unlike Sam Baker, who had an injury issue. Schrader's pretty durable, has proven himself to be very durable throughout his college and pro career. So I don't think injury is a major concern. He should be able to be solid for those 2 years, next 2 years, continue to maintain his current level of play, which is good, not amazing, but good. Certainly you're not, until you play the Von Millers of the world, you're not really afraid of too many edge rushers coming off the edge. You need that elite premier edge rusher you're always a little bit afraid of. But Schrader holds his own against some of the top guys. And then you can –
I feel like he's good against the Marcus Goldens of the world. It's the guys like the Von Millers and the I don't know. We haven't seen him against D Ford or Justin Houston yet. But basically, the AFC West is going to give him this.
Yeah.
And
I mean –
they don't play him again until 2020. So if he's still here, which I hope he is because that'd be awesome, that means that he's outperformed his contract. But if he's still here in 2020 and he, gets beat by Von Miller and Justin Houston and, Khalil Mack for a sack all in the same year, and that's all he gives up all year, I'll take it.
Well, I think I can be pretty confident saying the next time Ryan Schrader has to play Von Miller or Khalil Mack, it'll only be in a Super Bowl. So, I don't see Ryan Schrader being here in 2020. But maybe I'm wrong. Who knows?
I hope you're wrong because that means good things happened.
Yeah, probably. So, but yeah, I think this is a good move for the Falcons. I figured Schrader would be their highest priority to, keep this offseason. They were able to get that under wraps, outside of a couple of other guys. I don't feel like there's any sort of major free agents off the top of my head that I feel like the Falcons have to definitely keep. Schrader was certainly the top of that list. So, good move for the Falcons. I think this is going to be an off season over the next years. Plus, we're going to see a lot of big money contracts given to a bunch of homegrown players like Schrader. I think Trufant's going to get paid next summer. I think Matt Ryan's going to get paid this off season. I think Devontae Freeman and Jake Matthews probably won't get paid in 2017, but come 2018, I think both of those guys could get a sizable contract. And then you have, potentially Vic Beasley in 2019. So there's going to be a lot of money paid to some of these guys. Schrader's just sort of the tip of the iceberg at this point. And, we'll start to see whether Thomas Dimitrov's, excellent cap management skills are really all what they're cracked up to be over the next few years as we get a bunch more guys that aren't Tyson Jackson that are, getting paid a lot of money to do good things for the Falcons and seeing if the team can maintain good drafting while paying all these guys.
Yeah, once you take off the Tyson Jacksons and right now I have the Falcons on a $170 million cap. I have them with basically $50 million worth of cap space. That's before you would get rid of Brooks Reed deal. That's before you get rid of Tyson Jackson. You've got a good bit of money that you can spend in the offseason. You've already got 4 of your 5 linemen locked up. You've already got your starting tight end for the future locked up. You've already got your 2 starting receivers locked up. You've already got both your running backs and your starting quarterback. All those key spots. Basically every offensive starter and key offensive player outside of Jacob Tamme and Chris Chester are locked up for next year. And I'd honestly be okay with letting Chris Chester walk at the end of the season because I feel like he's easily upgradable in this year's draft or this year's free agency class. And, it's a right guard. You put a little bit of money in there and you're good. And then Jacob Tamme, I feel like Austin Hooper's the guy that's going to upgrade him. But really, you got to sink some money in the defense because I see 2 linebackers, an edge, maybe, 1, 2, 3 guys on the defensive line who are worth keeping, and then a bunch of defensive backs that are worth keeping. I would re-sign Ricardo Allen. I would re-sign Robert Alford and put the money into the defense and then go out and sign guys because you've got the money to do so. And I know a lot of people don't like the idea of re-signing Robert Alford, but what if he takes a deal similar to what Schrader's taking? Because he's also a little older as a free agent. He's also not going to be the young guy. So what if he takes that highest comp that he can get, which I don't think it's Janoris Jenkins. I'm just going to put that out there.
That's probably fair. I would be surprised if he gets a Janoris Jenkins deal because I was very surprised that Janoris Jenkins got a Janoris Jenkins deal. I think he'll probably get something around $9 million a year, something similar to what David Amerson got from the Raiders this past year. I feel like his price range is probably between $9 and $10 million a year, and I think that's just going to be too much for the Falcons.
And again, it comes down to structure. Because what if his pay isn't $9 to $10 million a year? What if he's looking at more of a Vontae Davis type deal, where he makes that is 9. Never mind. I'm trying to find it. This is Pac-Man deal. That's probably his best comp. Is that 3-year, $24 million deal that Pac-Man signed?
Maybe. I'm not optimistic, but we'll see. Let's talk about this Cardinals game. The Falcons, coming off their bye week, are going to play the Arizona Cardinals, the 4-5-1 Cardinals, who have been struggling throughout this season. Their Falcons should be getting a boost. We talked a little bit about Bosch, and his status is a little up in the air. But the Falcons should be welcoming the returns of Tevin Coleman and Desmond Trufant. Both of them coming off of injuries are expected to play this week. Coleman was, I think I saw somewhere that he said he was ready to go against the Eagles, but they held him out just to be on the safe side. So that's a positive sign. He sounds like he's chomping at the bit to go. Same thing with Trufant. For the Cardinals, the major injuries are really surrounding basically Mike Iupati and Tyrann Mathieu. Our old buddy Corey Peters, friend of this podcast, is questionable with a foot injury, but I don't think the Cardinals necessarily need Corey Peters to play in order to make a difference. Certainly, I'm sure they would want him to, but they have a good defensive line without Corey Peters. So it's Tyrann Mathieu with the shoulder injury and Mike Iupati, who dealt with a leg injury. Those are sort of the more crucial players that the Cardinals sort of need this week, because Iupati is really the only starter that began. I think I heard on last week that he's the only current starting offensive lineman they have that was in that NFC Championship game last year. Pretty much everybody else is hurt. And Tyrann Mathieu is one of the best prior to his injury, was one of the best nickel cornerbacks in the NFL, if not the best. So, he certainly could make an impact in this game.
Well, Mathieu, Peters, and Buchanan are all limited today. But what I found interesting was Earl Watford, the other starting guard, Mike Iupati, they were either limited or out. And then Kevin Minter, the starting middle linebacker, and Patrick Peterson missed practice with illness. If Peterson's missing practice, if Peterson misses the game, I'd say the Cardinals are basically done. Because there's nobody on that roster outside of Patrick Peterson that can even compete with Julio. They really have to get a pass rush all day.
I would be surprised if Peterson misses this game, though.
I'd be surprised too, but I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah. I'm assuming that he was a little under the weather and no big deal, but I don't know. This is going to be an interesting game. Falcons going to be, other than Bosch, are going to be pretty much at full strength. The Cardinals are definitely not. They have a bunch of injuries throughout this year, bunch of guys on IR already, half their starting offensive line. So this is a situation where, Falcons can take advantage of them being a little bit beat up. I think some of these injuries, particularly to their offensive line, have greatly contributed to some of their struggles this year. John Brown has missed a big chunk of this season, not really impacted. Been dealing with sorry about that. Been dealing with I forget what it is, but basically the Cardinals are not playing like the Cardinals that we saw last year. And if they're any more beat up this week, then it's not going to help them.
Pretty much.
Let's talk about some of the key matchups, Scott. Now, I think the marquee matchup is going to be Julio against Peterson. I'm going to assume Peterson's going to play. I know basically you're going to have to kidnap Patrick Peterson and lock him in the trunk of a car to get him not to play in this game. Same thing with Julio. Those two have been going at it since, 2008 at LSU and Alabama. So, they've only really got that one opportunity in 2014 just because all the other Falcon Cardinals matchups, usually Julio was injured prior to that. So it's one of those things. I know Peterson's going to want to get a rematch in because he did not have a good week that game. So Julio has always sort of had Patrick Peterson's number going back to their days in the SEC. But, this is going to be the marquee matchup. If Peterson can contain Julio Jones, then, I don't know what that's going to do to the Falcons offense. As we've seen throughout the season, the Falcons can sort of spread the ball around and sort of do good things without sort of relying on Julio. But it's certainly, in terms of that rivalry between those two guys, certainly it would be a feather in Patrick Peterson's hat if he can sort of hold Julio to under, I guess, 70 or 80 yards. That's kind of a win for any cornerback if you can keep Julio in the 50, 60-yard range. So we'll see how.
Unless the Falcons run for like 250 yards on them, then it's, you stopped Julio because they didn't need Julio.
Yeah. I mean, that's the hope. Like, if that does happen, then it's, you see big games from Sanu, especially if Matthew's out. You see big games from Taylor Gabriel. You see big games for, the running game, which is going to be tough because the Cardinals are one of the better run defenses in the league. So, this is going to be I think this is going to be a lot tougher matchup. I don't think people should automatically look at the Cardinals' sort of recent struggles in their record and think, oh, yeah, the Falcons should roll over the Cardinals. They have, their defense is legit. And we've seen throughout the season, whenever the Falcons face a legitimate defense, that can give them problems because we know that our defense isn't going to win us any games. But maybe that changes this week just because of the Cardinals' tendency to turn the ball over. I posted a stat. This is an interesting stat. The Cardinals in games where they've avoided when they've had 0 turnovers and had a plus 12 turnover ratio, they're 3-1-1. In their other games, they've had a minus 13 turnover margin and been 1-4 in those games. So basically, the Falcons can force the Cardinals into making some turnovers and giving our offense a few more opportunities. It should be a win. But if we can't, then this could be a little bit more problematic.
The good news is the game is in Atlanta, and Arizona does not do well on the road at all. Mm-hmm. They're 1-3 on the road this year. They're scoring across the board when they have to go out of town. It doesn't go up, I'll put it that way. They've only scored, 18, 21, 20, and 24. And that's all on the road, even in domes. So, they're averaging less than 20 points a game. And, yeah, it's against the Panthers, the Vikings, the Bills, and the Niners. But, well, actually, they scored 33 in the Niners, but the Niners are a joke. So, they're averaging 22.73 or 75 points per game on the road. At home, they're averaging quite a bit more. Let's see. Yeah, at home they're averaging more, and they're just playing better as a whole because they're able to get those turnovers. But even then, their offense isn't great this year. They don't have they just don't have the same talent that they did before. But I guess when Evan Mathis and Jared Veldier are sitting there on injured reserve, that doesn't help. Yeah. And with Mikey Iupati hurting, if Iupati misses this game, I don't see any way the Falcons, should allow a lot of running yards. I don't see any way that the Falcons shouldn't be able to get pressure on Carson Palmer. And Palmer is one of those quarterbacks that you put pressure on him. I'm not saying he folds, but he does make a lot of stupid decisions with the ball.
Yeah.
And you could see a game where Atlanta winds up, if they're up early, if they can get up 2 touchdowns early and they force them, you could see a situation where Atlanta's getting 4 or 5 sacks, getting 3 or 4 interceptions in a game just because the ball is bouncing Atlanta's way and they get up early.
Yeah, I agree with that. Carson Palmer is one of those quarterbacks. If you can get him to press, he becomes really bad really quickly. And I do feel like this is an opportunity for our defense to sort of redeem itself after a very bad outing against Eagles. Really, a lot of bad outings this season. Weak offensive line, especially if Iupati's out. Freeney and Claiborne should just absolutely destroy John Wetzel, who's been replacing Veldier at left tackle. Vic Beasley should do more than enough damage against DJ Humphreys. You got A.Q. Shipley at center, who's a functional starting center, but Grady Jarrett should be able to dominate that matchup. Earl Watford has really struggled this year, and he's nicked up as well, so that's a favorable matchup for Courtney Upshaw, if such a favorable matchup has ever existed for Courtney Upshaw. So it really is one of those situations where the Falcons should have no problem controlling the line of scrimmage. But, that's going to be the key because David Johnson is Arizona's number one weapon. There are 2 primary guys that you have to worry about are David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald. And I think it's going to be, I think the Falcons are certainly going to stack the box and force the Cardinals to try to throw the ball down the field. I know Arians would love to take that bait. I feel comfortable with a healthy Trufant, particularly if we sort of have him shadow Fitzgerald and follow him into the slot. I think that would be the best way to sort of combat Arizona's receiving core, because I know Michael Floyd and John Brown historically have been dangerous, but the way they've been playing this season, I feel like Robert Alford, whoever he lines up against, he'll lock, whether it's Floyd or Brown. And then I feel pretty comfortable that even, Jalen Collins or Brian Poole can handle the other guys. So, I think if the Falcons stack the box and sort of force the Cardinals to throw the ball down the field, I don't think Arizona's offense, it shouldn't be able to sort of exploit them that way, especially if our pass rush can get going against a very beat up and weak offensive line. So this is a favorable matchup as we've seen recently for this defense. And if they struggle this week, then I don't know if there's really any hope for the future for them. If they can't get coming off of a really rough outing, coming out of the bye, being healthy as they've been in recent weeks. If they can't get it going this week, then I have really no hope for them to really pick it up down the stretch.
I also think we're going to see a little bit more of Jalen Collins, especially if this game ends up going – if this game ends up being a little bit more of a blowout either way, I do think we'll see a little bit more of Jalen Collins instead of Brian Poole, just because the Cardinals have a guy who's a perfect matchup for Collins in Michael Floyd.
I agree.
So I think Collins going against Floyd would be probably ideal. And then you would have Alford on Brown, and you got to put Trufant on Fitz.
Yeah. After the struggles that Poole had against Jordan Matthews, I don't want to see him try to match up one-on-one with Fitz in the slot. So whether, they put Alford in the slot to try to deal with that, or Trufant have him shadow them in the slot, which they've done this year. I believe they did it in the which game was it? Was it the Saints game?
It was the Saints game. They had him shadow Cooks all day.
Yeah. It was whatever the game was that Trufant had that first sack in. I think it was the Saints game, right?
Yeah, that was the Saints game.
Yeah, he played quite a bit in the slot that game. So, I think the Falcons have what it takes to sort of match up with the Cardinals offense. Basically, as long as they don't let David Johnson run wild on them, which after the Eagles' performance, I can't necessarily dismiss that, but I certainly think they'll be motivated to prevent that from happening. I think our defense should be able to handle this matchup, and then it's going to really boil down to our offense being able to move the ball against the Cardinals' defense.
Pretty much.
And, I think that's going to be the real tough task for this team. Obviously, Peterson is, no one can shut down Julio Jones, but Patrick Peterson is about as good a matchup as you're going to find in this league. He'll probably do a better job than what we've seen anybody else do this year in terms of playing him one-on-one. That if he's successfully able to do that, then the Cardinals will be able to dial up their blitz. Handling the blitz has been a problem for this offense all throughout this season. They have a good defensive line. Calais Campbell, Chandler Jones will be interesting matchups for the left side of our offensive line. Jake Matthews, Andy Levitre. I'm hoping that those guys can sort of hold their own and sort of deal with those guys. Marcus Golden has been having a solid year, not an amazing year. He'll certainly push Ryan Schrader. I don't feel like he'll overwhelm Ryan Schrader, but he'll certainly give him a tough matchup on the opposite side. So, this is an opportunity for this offense to sort of show that it can go up against a really premium front seven and do their thing and, exert their will on a good defense. That's something that we really haven't consistently seen this year, and I'm hoping we see it this week.
I agree. I hope that and I know that I'm kind of hoping for Kevin Minter to be out, just because I think if the Falcons are going to exert their will, it's going to be because they're running the ball.
I agree.
So if you've got Tevin Coleman running on those gap plays, those gap inside traps. If he's back healthy, he could be breaking off big runs. I think if you've got Freeman in there grinding them down on those inside zones, left, right, and that grinds a defense down to play that inside zone, those outside zones all day. You get stretched wide, you get hit right in the mouth, you get stretched wide again. It is not fun to play against. It's kind of frustrating because you're like, man, I've got to worry about getting cut at the knees. If he does hit me up high, I'm going to get dragged a couple yards either way. So you really got to attack a defense like this. That's essentially a 3-3-5. If we're looking at it for what it is, it's a 3-3-5. With Buchanan in there lined up as a linebacker instead of as a true safety. So I don't think that the Falcons are really – I don't think it's a bad matchup for Atlanta. I think it's probably one of the better matchups Atlanta has this year, but they've got to game plan it right. And with 2 weeks, they better game plan it right to where they're up 14-0 or even 21-0 after the first few drives so that they can just let the defense pin their ears back and make Carson Palmer do stupid things. I would love for this game to be a blowout.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. You got anything else to add before we move on to the mailbag?
Not really. Just I want to see Atlanta blow out the Cardinals. Like, there's no reason for them to not. Outside of maybe me setting ridiculously unrealistic expectations. But I feel like if there's enough injuries, and I think there are on the Cardinals, I think Atlanta should win this game.
Yeah, I think that certainly they should win this game. They should win pretty much every game that they have the rest of the season. I think that's fair to say. I think this is going to be a close battle. I think it could be a blowout, but I think that's only if the Cardinals sort of do what they've done in some of these other games and turn the ball over a bunch of times, which is certainly a possibility. And basically, it winds up every time that Carson Palmer throws a pick, the Falcons turn that into a touchdown or something like that. And then all of a sudden we're looking at it, going into the third quarter, it's like 34-10 or something like that. Then I certainly could see that possibility happening. But I don't sort of expect that sort of to happen. So I'm thinking it's going to be a little bit more of a closely contested game because I just don't see our offense against that defense just running away with it. I think we can control the game, but I feel like we're going to be pushed to the test to play 4 quarters against this Cardinals defense because I have that much respect for their defense. Don't have a ton of respect for their offense, and I do feel like because of the limited weapons that they've shown this year with bad offensive line play, bad quarterback play, and nobody outside of David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald, even though I don't have a high opinion of our defense, I do feel like they should be able to do it against that group. I'm sure David Johnson will probably wind up with like 120 combined yards because they'll get like 60 yards rushing and 60 yards receiving or something like that. So he'll have a good day. But I feel like if that's all they have, then that shouldn't be enough to sort of beat us.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say on that either. But I will say last time that the Falcons played the Cardinals, they did stick with the whole let's run the ball quite a bit. They ran the ball 34 times. They did throw the ball around at will, more or less, with Julio Jones and Harry Douglas. So I almost wonder what would happen now that Ryan actually has some explosive talents on the roster. And Freeman's not a rookie. And he's got Coleman back. I mean, I don't know how well they're going to be able to cover Coleman if Coleman lines up in the slot. Like, yeah, Tyrann Mathieu, one of the best slot guys in the world, whatever. Can he cover the raw speed and size that Coleman brings when he goes into the slot? When Devontae Freeman's coming out of the backfield, do they have someone at linebacker who can cover him one-on-one? I like Buchanan, but that is something that Buchanan tends to struggle with. I feel like as long as the Falcons can create that pocket for Ryan, they should be able to throw on the Cardinals all day.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Let's get into these mailbag questions. Not as many as we normally get, but that's fine. It's holiday weekend, so you guys, no hard feelings. Robbie Bennett asks, do you think we can cut waste on D-line, Brooks Reed, Tyson Jackson, Courtney Upshaw, and draft there with rookie contracts and pay Robert Alford?
Yes and no. And I'll get into detail here. I think the Falcons can cut Reed and Jackson and Upshaw, but I think if they do and they've got, that projected $60 million that I'm even with the Schrader contract, if they have that $50 to $60 million in free money, they've got to go out and get at least one of those positions filled this offseason. Whether it is a solid guard like Kevin Zeitler, whether it is a defensive end to play the Leo, like Jason Pierre-Paul or Nick Perry, or even giving Charles Johnson a contract for strong side defensive end in the base, whether they go out and get a 3-technique defensive tackle like Hankins or Poe, or even if they could get Benny Logan or Kawan Short to come here, those would be massive upgrades to what they have now. Or hell, give Nick Fairley a 3-year deal for like $10 million. I feel like he would be a great upgrade for this defensive line. But you got to go out there and get something. If it's Nick Fairley and if you can go out there and get Nick Fairley and Nick Perry, and that's all you get this offseason along the defensive line, I think you've upgraded off of Brooks Reed and, Jonathan Babineau enough to where you're like, okay, well, I can draft some guys and I can pay Alford. And I feel like paying a corner in that situation is understandable because you've got a deep defensive line draft. You might as well draft a defensive tackle, a defensive end, and then another defensive tackle later on in the draft. And then draft an offensive lineman at some point. But even then, there's so many good players in free agency, and the Falcons have enough money to go out and get what they need to get that I'm not too worried about them re-signing Alford if they need to re-sign Alford, or if they feel they need to re-sign Alford. They can do it. I don't think it's going to be a long-term cap burden if they do either, especially if they structure a good bit of the money in the first year, the way that they're doing with Schrader.
Okay. My stance with this has always been, particularly with Alford, I don't think it's an issue of can the Falcons pay Alford. I think they will have the cap space to be able to afford to pay Alford. I think it's should they or will they, and I don't think they should, and I don't think they will. I think they're going to approach it from a standpoint of, whether Alford's going to probably, I said it earlier, I think he'll get paid a contract that's probably going to average somewhere north of $9 million a year. Is he going to make $9 million $9 million a year for 4 years? Probably not. But it's going to be one of those deals where he's going to get 15, 16, 18 million guaranteed on the open market. And I feel like the Falcons are going to be in a situation where why are we going to pay Robert Alford $15 million or so over the next 2 years when we can pay someone probably a third of that and probably get like 70 to 60% of the player. If you can get 60% of the player for 30% the price, why wouldn't you do that? And I think that's ultimately the decision the Falcons going to make at that position. And whether it's a guy like Nolan Carroll or another guy that I was thinking about the other day, I can't remember off the top of my head, but somebody like that makes a lot more sense to me from the Falcons sort of perspective, especially when they're going to be paying, Trufant, $15 million a year over the next 5 years. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to throw a whole bunch of money at the cornerback position when it's not that important for the scheme. It's more important to have a good front forward. It's more important to have a good middle linebacker, a good free safety, a good strong safety. If you have Trufant and you have like a above average starter at the other cornerback spot, you're good to go. Like, that's basically all Seattle has really had for the last 4 or 5 years. Richard Sherman in an above-average starter. That's all you really need, especially if you can get pressure on the quarterback. So, like, as for cutting Reed, Jackson, and Upshaw, I think Upshaw is actually a free agent. I expect
you don't have to cut him.
Yeah, I expect Upshaw to be re-signed to a similar sort of 1-year deal. I think sort of his play over as a injury replacement for Derek Shelby probably will get him a modest offer from the Falcons to come back and play a similar role next year. So I expect him to be back.
A 1-year, $2 million deal would break the bank, and it'd be the same kind of situation.
Yeah,
I can see that.
And with Reed and Jackson, I do expect the Falcons to cut those two guys, but it wouldn't also shock me if the Falcons sort of cut them and then say, well, we'll give you a much cheaper deal to come back. I think with Reed, I think the team likes him probably more than most fans do. And I feel like if they could get him on a similar deal that they had with Corey Bierman towards the end of his career, I think that's ideal for them. And I think they'll probably cut Reed and sort of let him shop himself out in the open market. If he gets a better offer somewhere else, he'll go somewhere else. If he doesn't, then he could potentially be a Falcon. I can see a very similar situation with Tyson Jackson, where he's playing for 1.5-2 million next year, which is going to be a lot lower than I think the $6 million that he's projected to make if he doesn't get cut. So, I think there's a realistic possibility that all three of those guys could wind up being back in Atlanta, but probably at much cheaper deals than sort of right now. All right. Dirty Boards 34 asks, why do the Falcons only sign Matts for special teams and to play quarterback?
Because they're trolling us.
I think it makes it easier to coach those guys in the film room and on practice. They just say Matt. No, Matt number 1, Matt number 2. It's easier, I guess.
No, it's just Matt. Quit fucking up. It doesn't matter which Matt you're talking to. All of them need to take the advice. Quit fucking up.
Yeah, it makes it easier to coach them, right? You can just say, Matt, don't do this, and everybody has to heed it,
Or Matt, you got to kick the shit out of the ball. All right, you're talking to everybody in that room. Like, hey, you got to kick the shit out of the ball. All right, that works.
Hey, Matt, don't throw an interception. It applies to all the quarterbacks. Our good friend Andrew Schauweiler asks, if Kyle Shanahan leaves to become a head coach, who would you guys bring in to be the next OC?
Oh, man. Honestly, I would stay in-house. I know there's not really a guy who's got offensive coordinator experience per se. But I'd look at two different guys. I'd look at either Wade Harmon, who's got experience as an offensive line coach, tight ends coach for quite a bit, knows offenses really well, always really been in that always been around the West Coast offense. He was one of Billick's tight ends coaches originally. It worked for the Vikings under Tice, so he knows a good bit of both the gap and the zone schemes. I think he'd mix up a little bit more gap runs into this system, but just to make Tevin Coleman more effective. But I think Harmon would be a good fit. Another guy is Matt LaFleur. He's been a quarterbacks coach his entire career, offensive assistant, worked his way up. He was an offensive coordinator back in 2007 for a small college called Ashland. But I'd love to see him, get a shot. If the Falcons lose Shanahan, LaFleur would be the guy who they'd be grooming. And then the final guy, and I know this might get some flack, why not Raheem Morris? Think about how interesting the play calling would be when you've got a guy who used to be a defensive coordinator calling offensive plays. Like, hey, I know what I'd be looking at as a defensive coordinator in this situation. So I'm going to call this play. I know I'm going to be looking at as a defensive coordinator in a 2nd and 1. I'm going to call this play. So it might be a slightly different play call than what you'd expect. But if 2nd and 1 is, oh, hey, we're going to run a sweep to the right as opposed to a run it right up the middle, and they gain 18 yards on it, you're not going to argue with the process.
I think in an ideal world, my favorite type of offense that I would love the Falcons to run is a Bruce Arians-esque offense. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's realistic. I don't even know if it's a situation, because you would have to sort of revamp your personnel to such a significant degree that you would, it probably is not worth your while. So for me, I personally, I don't really care who calls the plays. I know that's a big deal to a lot of people because they always think the play calling is the end-all, be-all of whether the Falcons win or lose a game. It doesn't really matter to me. Most of these guys are competent at their job. It's just really about whether you have a good quarterback, whether you have good offensive linemen, whether you have receivers that can separate, and whether you have running backs that can create on their own. And if you have those things, and I think the Falcons do have that, then it doesn't really matter who's calling the plays, assuming they're not calling the most vanilla plays in the world. So anybody who's probably going to maintain a zone blocking scheme, maintain a play-action passing game, and not be afraid to take shots downfield, whoever that is, is there a person specifically in mind that I think should or would do that? Not really. My expectation, if you're asking me more of not who I want, but a prediction, I would assume Greg Knapp would probably be the top of the choice, just because Dan Quinn worked with them in San Francisco and I think Seattle. I think he'd probably be reasonable to get from Denver, because where he's a quarterback's coach, and he ran a very similar scheme as Kyle Shanahan when he was in Atlanta in previous years, and it's the same basic offense. So I would assume that's who Dan Quinn would target. Outside of that guy, your guess is as good as mine.
I guess for me, the one name that I'm just kind of looking at right now is Doug Marrone. He runs that zone scheme. He's probably getting fired this year with the rest of the Jaguars. Outside of him, I mean, I don't think anybody who really runs that zone scheme, that West Coast offense, is going to get fired unless the Packers really surprise us. And in that case, you got to go out and get Tom Clements, because he would be the guy. If there's anybody, he would be the guy that you'd want to run the offense. Just because he's got the experience in the scheme. But I don't really see anybody that I think is going to get fired this year that has experience in the scheme, knows what they're doing, all, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think McCarthy's – I forgot about McCarthy's staff being on the hot seat. So I do think getting maybe one of those guys, if that does go down, also makes sense. But at this point in time, until they get fired, I can't really expect them to get fired.
Yeah. And the reason why I like Clements is Clements, he's been working with Aaron Rodgers. He knows how a cerebral quarterback works. He's been a quarterback coach for years. I mean, and then he became the offensive coordinator in 2012, and that's when the Packers had their biggest explosion. And they run basically a zone scheme with a West Coast offense, because that seems to be what everybody in this whole coaching tree that Bill Walsh had and that Mike Holmgren had likes to run.
Yeah. Got a couple questions from Marquell Johnson. He says his first question is, how well do the Falcons match up with the Seahawks?
As we saw in this past season, I think they match up pretty well. Beat the Seahawks on any given day, and I put the odds of them beating the Seahawks outside of Seattle way higher than in Seattle.
Yeah, someone asked a similar question in terms of who's the toughest matchup in the NFC for the Falcons. I do think a healthy Seahawks team with a healthy Russell, a healthy Cam, a healthy Michael Bennett is the toughest matchup for the Falcons, just because I think their defense sort of, matches up very well with our offense. I do think the Falcons can beat Seattle, particularly if they were, not playing in Seattle. I think the odds would go up. But in terms of sort of sitting here saying that I think the Falcons are better than the Seahawks, like I couldn't say that. But I think there's a reasonable matchup. I think if we were to play them again, I think our defense should play better, particularly our pass rush and our defensive line should be better than they were in that game. I do think Thomas Rawls is a little bit harder to contain than Kristen Michael. So that's a bonus for the Seahawks. But, I think these are two reasonably evenly matched teams. One has a elite defense, one has an elite offense. And so basically whoever comes out better in that head-to-head matchup is probably going to be the team that winds up winning that game. Our next question from Markel is, I am beginning to think Taylor Gabriel was a big part of the game plan versus Seattle, right?
I don't remember seeing him on the field versus Seattle.
Yeah, I'm actually have to look this up because I don't recall that sort of specifics.
From what I remember, the Falcons used 3 different tight ends to score big plays on them, or 2 different tight ends to score big plays, and Julio Jones had a massive reception. And they basically were like, let's beat Sherman with all these different matchup combos. That's what I remember from the Seattle game. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, that's we went big more in that game. Gabriel played 13 snaps. That game had 1 catch, 2 targets. I mean, I guess if the question is, do I think Gabriel would be a bigger part of the game plan if we played them again than what he was a couple of weeks ago? I would agree with that.
Yes.
But I don't recall Gabriel having that much of an impact in that game.
I'd almost expect them to run with more of the big set, though, because the Seahawks linebackers don't cover tight ends real well.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've noticed. And I know that's one thing Aaron noticed. So I would expect more seam routes from Austin Hooper against Seattle if Atlanta played him again. Attack Cam Chancellor right in his teeth with a guy who's just as big as he is.
Yeah. Markel asks, how long do you think Quinn and company can turn the defense into a top defense? 2 years or more?
It's probably going to take another 2 years to turn this into a true top 10, top 5 defense. And I'm okay with that. And even if it never ends up being a top 10 or a top 5 defense, as long as it's a top 10 defense and the Falcons win a lot of games, that's all I really care about. Honestly, it could be an average defense. As long as the Falcons win a lot of games and the defense can help Atlanta win a game in the playoffs or win multiple games in the playoffs, that's all I really care about. If the Falcons can get some pass rush and it steps up and becomes a top defense in the playoffs, it could be the 32nd ranked defense in the season in terms of yards, as long as they're not scoring points. Like, as long as other teams aren't scoring points, I don't care how many yards they get. Just don't let them score. So, for me, just be at least average, and I think this team goes a long way.
Yeah, I think if, my most optimistic is probably 2018, so 2 years. I think even if you wind up, like, let's say, everybody gets their wish and we get that stud free safety next year, we get that stud D tackle next year's draft. You're not really expecting those guys to come in year one and be these sort of dynamic difference makers. It's going to take them probably the better part of 2 or 3 years, usually 3 years. But let's say best case scenario, they're hitting their stride in year 2. You're looking at, by then, Keanu Neal and basically this year's draft class, and by 2018, they'll be entering their 3rd years. And as I said, like, the 3rd year is usually the year where guys sort of make it or don't. Like, they usually hit their peak. particularly on defense. So, those guys should be hitting their peak. You'll have, our 2015 draft class in their contract year. So, you'll have guys like Collins and Grady Jarrett very motivated to play, great football. Same thing with Beasley in order to get their money the very next year. So I do feel like if you're going to, if you're looking for probably the most likely case, if you're talking about a Falcons defense that's, whether they're the sixth best defense or the 12th best defense, but one of those defenses that people say, oh yeah, that defense can go toe to toe with any offense and handle their own and even, shut down or slow down a top offense like ours, basically on the same level as a Seattle, as a Denver, as an Arizona, as a Philadelphia, talk about in that light, then I think 2018 is probably the best case scenario, maybe more, but that's if basically everything breaks their way and this year's draft class, nobody drops off, everybody improves. Last year's draft class, the same thing, and they continue to hit on picks and free agency. So 2018, probably 2019.
And honestly, I'd be okay if they were, just an LA type defense. That 5 to 10 range.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with the Rams, they're a team that they're not an elite all-around defense, but they match up really well with certain teams because of their defensive line. And I think that's ultimately sort of where you want the Falcons' strength to be, whether it's in the secondary, the linebacker core, the defensive line. Ideally, in my ideal world, it would be the defensive line. But you want them to be able to excel in one part of their defense so that when they play some of these teams that have either bad offensive lines or bad receiver core or whatever the case may be, they're just able to overwhelm them with that matchup and sort of exert their will and say, okay, with, let's say, the Rams, when they play a team with a questionable offensive line, Aaron Donald and Robert Quinn and those guys are going to destroy them and wreak havoc. That's one of the reasons why the Rams have played the Seahawks so well in recent years, just because they're always able to sort of control the line of scrimmage and slow down that running game in Russell Wilson. All right. I think this is our last question of the night from Raekwon Gilbert. He asks, how much Zax sauce do you get when you're eating at Zaxby's?
If you don't get at least 2 packets, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I don't go crazy with the Zax sauce, but I usually take what they give me and just dip out the get down to scrape the bottom of that the packet that they give me. So
yeah,
I'm not hoarding. It's basically it's basically Thousand Island dressing. So it's not like I need to I gotta go and get all the Zax sauce I can get because there's no other place on the planet that I can get Zax sauce.
It's better than Thousand Island dressing.
It's better, but it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, it's not too far off, but it's better than Thousand Island dressing.
Yeah. I know Raekwon used to work at Zaxby's. I don't know if he's dropping a hint like they're peeing in the Zax sauce container or something like that. I don't know what he's getting at with that. I
don't know, man. Those things are sealed. Thank God, too. Because you do have guys like Raekwon sitting there at his Zaxby's. just fucking around, Raekwon. Relax.
Yep.
It's Thanksgiving. So, finally, to close us out for the night, I'm going to ask a question. What are you thankful for, Aaron?
What am I thankful for? I'm thankful that I don't have to spend this year, stressing about the Falcons to the same level that I have in recent years. There's other things that I can stress over in my life, but finally, it's not the Falcons. Usually the last couple of years at this point in the season, I've given up.
Yeah, you have.
I'm checked out. I'm just going through the motions these last couple of weeks of the season. So that's not the case this year. I feel like we're going to make the playoffs. I'm very much looking forward to that. So I'm just sort of watching and seeing what they do these last couple of games. Hopefully, they don't screw it up. But I'm not stressed about it. So that's what I'm thankful for.
I am thankful for my girlfriend. Thankful that I have a job. And I'm thankful that the Falcons don't look like utter garbage. I'm thankful that the Falcons have Dan Quinn, who actually seems like a decent enough head coach.
Very
And
versatile. Yeah. Resilient.
yeah, he's very resilient, very versatile. Knows what the hell he's doing. Can coach on both offense and defense. You know, he's a head coach that everybody loves, especially Falcons fans that aren't having to deal with a shitty team anymore. And I'm thankful that Matt Ryan finally has an offensive line. Because as we all saw in 2012, Matt Ryan's biggest issue was his offensive line for the last 3 years. And now that he's finally got a center that's worth a shit, it helps out quite a bit.
Yeah, there was a point not that long ago that I sort of resigned myself to we would never see Matt Ryan sort of play at the same level he had in 2012 ever again. And I'm glad that's not the case. You know, I was always sort of like, oh, well, Matt Ryan's never going to have a good supporting cast around him ever again because this team is poorly run and all that stuff. And, you know, that's not the case anymore. And I'm very thankful that we get to see Matt Ryan do some good and hopefully sort of carry us over well into January and potentially February this year. But I'm certainly happy that we got to see good Matt Ryan at least one more time before he starts getting up there in age.
Oh, man. Hold on. Aaron just said into January and maybe even February this year. Am I hearing you right?
You know, it's a possibility. You know, usually you're that guy and I'm not that guy, but it's a pretty weak league right now. And even though I don't look at the Falcons as a Super Bowl team, I think, you know, they can get a couple of breaks here and there. You know, I won't completely rule it out.
If they can get a couple breaks, and then they can end up playing like Dallas, and I think Atlanta matches up well with Dallas. I don't think Dallas has the defense to really handle the Falcons. It's their offense that I worry about. I think as long as the Eagles miss the playoffs and Atlanta gets, I don't know, the Giants, who I think they can beat, and Dallas, I think they can at least make it to the NFC Championship game. Now, past that, I don't know. And hopefully the Falcons could somehow secure a bye. So it's just like the Giants and then Dallas. But because I don't want to see the Seahawks. I know you probably don't want to see the Seahawks. Unless it's in Atlanta, I don't want to see the Seahawks. Because I don't trust going into Seattle and getting that call from the refs that you might need and late in the game, like Julio getting pass interfered with, because we've all seen it happen to where the Seahawks don't get flagged for it. Richard Sherman took a wide receiver's head off on Monday Night Football one week, and it wasn't called. Just completely blindsided a wide receiver, and it wasn't called because it was in Seattle. So I think as long as the game is not in Seattle, Atlanta stands a chance at winning because they don't have to go up against both the refs and Seattle. But that's just me.
You know, I'm a little more concerned about Dallas than you are, but and like, you know, I don't want anybody to get it twisted. I'm not sitting here saying I think the Falcons go to the Super Bowl. Like, I'm more concerned. You know, I think getting to the playoffs and winning a playoff game is sort of where I'm at. But I'm like, I think, you know, they certainly are capable if they can sort of play to their best ability. And, you know, I would like to see how they perform down the stretch. So as to whether I am confident that they can do that, particularly with their defense starting to play a little bit better, certainly better than they played against Philadelphia. And if their offense can sort of, you know, they got some tough matchups coming up. I think this Arizona game is a nice litmus test. I think Kansas City's defense is going to be a nice litmus test. I think St. Louis with their defensive line is going to be a nice litmus test to sort of see if this offense is going to fade a little bit, or is it going to be able to maintain what they've been doing throughout most of the season, which is being able to go up against quality teams and sort of putting up 30 points, getting big plays, and doing a better job at, maintaining drives, which they did not do very well against Seattle or Philadelphia. So I want to see them do that these next couple of games.
Yeah, and hopefully they just go nuts and they score 45 to 50 points a game the next 3 games, and then people are going, holy shit, what happened down in Atlanta at the bye?
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping they come out of this unlike last year, and they came out pretty strong against the Colts, and then they sort of faded at the end of that game. I hope they come out strong and don't fade, and I hope it goes beyond this one game and for the next 6 games. So, all right, guys, that's our show this week. Enjoy your Turkey Day. Get full. Get mad at the Cowboys on Thursday. We will be back next week to talk about this Cardinals game. Yeah, you guys can use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. You can also tweet at myself. I'm at FalcFan. Scott is at Karasik S. You can tweet at the show's Twitter handle, which is Falcons PFC. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher. You can find our archives on Pro Football Central. Please give us a rating and review there. And I think that's it. Yeah. So that's our show this week, guys.
Happy Turkey Day.